There are stories that sit somewhere between history and myth, stories that refuse to die no matter how much the modern world tries to forget them. One of them begins in a mountain village in southern Italy, a place of dust and silence where faith is not an idea, but the foundation of life itself. In that village, a young man once claimed to see the devil. Later, he claimed to see Christ. And for the next 50 years, he would bear the same wounds the Gospels say were nailed into the hands and feet of Jesus of Nazareth. His name was Francesco Forgione, which is my English-American translation of the local pronunciation Francesco Forgione. But the world would know him better as Padre Pio of Pietrelcina, the friar who bled with Christ. Now, depending on who you ask, he was either a saint, a fraud, a miracle worker, or even a madman. He heard the sins of soldiers fresh from the front lines. He spoke of invisible wars between angels and demons. He was investigated by the Vatican more times than any priest of this century, and he died with crowds outside his monastery, weeping, believing they had seen the face of holiness. What's amazing is that this isn't a legend from the Middle Ages. It happened in the 20th century, in the same century as the atom bomb, the Holocaust, and the moon landing. And that's what makes it so unsettling. Because if Padre Pio was who he said he was, if his wounds were real, then the holiness itself is not just a relic of history. It's here, now, a reality we can neither explain nor escape. This is the Hallowed Dead, Padre Pio, a journey through faith, skepticism, and the mysterious intersection between human suffering and the divine. In this first part, we will begin not with miracles, but with a boy who saw heaven and hell before he even left his home. In protezione Dei. Before we begin this first episode, I want to offer a brief personal introduction. My name is Kevin Sullivan. By profession, I'm a medical provider. For the last decade, though, I've also lived a second life behind the microphone, producing podcasts, eventually working with a major network in New York City, and learning the craft from people I admired for years. It was an incredible ride. But somewhere along the way, even with all the excitement, I felt a growing emptiness, a sense that my work, while creative, lacked spiritual purpose. Over the past few years, through what I can only describe as unmistakable and grace-filled encounters with God, I felt myself being called in a different direction, one that asked more of my heart and less of my ego. I spent the better part of last year wrestling with that call. In the end, I chose obedience over discomfort. I closed my production company and stepped into something new, something I've come to call the Hallowed Dead. This series is an anthology of the lives of the saints. And I know some of my Protestant brothers and sisters might raise an eyebrow to that. But regardless of denomination, I believe we can all draw wisdom, courage, and inspiration from the lives of people who surrendered everything to God. These men and women embraced sacrifice, endured suffering, and lived with a clarity that comes only from knowing Christ is King. Their stories challenge us. They invite us to look inward, to measure our own lives against eternity, and to remember that everything this world has to offer is nothing compared to the kingdom of heaven. So wherever you're listening to this from, I hope you'll join me in this journey. Sit back, settle in, and maybe, through the lives of the Hallowed Dead, you'll discover something new about your own walk with God. To the people of Pietrelcina, their small village in southern Italy with dusty roads and stone walls, the smell of olive trees in the air, they were standing at the edge of the known world. Francesco Forgione was born May 25, 1887 in Pietrelcina, a small village perched on the southern spine of Italy. His parents were peasants, Grazio and Maria Giuseppa Forgione, devout, poor, and soaked in the rhythms of rural Catholic life. From the beginning, the Forgiones knew their son was different. He didn't like games or mischief. He preferred the church, the silence, the smell of wax and stone. At just 5 years old, he began to see things. He told his mother that radiant figures appeared to him, angels and saints, and that sometimes shadowy shapes followed. At first, his family assumed it was imagination, but when the boy described the apparitions with startling precision, his mother reportedly told neighbors, "My Francesco sees the same things that priests see at the altar." That's how it starts. Not with thunder or lightning, but with a child seeing through a world that the rest of us only half believe in. He grew up fasting voluntarily, praying consistently, and even disciplining himself in ways that unsettled others. He wanted purity. He wanted closeness to God, whatever it cost. But in southern Italy, the world was changing fast. The Industrial Revolution was creeping in. The church, though ever present, was suspicious of anything mystical. The young Francesco was caught between two worlds, an old world of saints and angels, and a new one that trusted in only what it could measure. By age 15, Francesco felt called to the priesthood. His father left for America to earn money to send him to seminary, a gesture that by itself says something about the faith that carried his family. He entered the Capuchin friars in 1903. On his first day, he took a new name, Pio, after St. Pius. It was a symbolic rebirth, a tradition of shedding the old life and donning the habits of poverty, chastity, and obedience. His health, though, was fragile. He suffered fevers, stomach pain, and exhaustion. At times, his body seemed to betray him, his lungs and digestion so poor that superiors considered sending him home. But he pressed on. His letters from this period reveal something deeper. He was already describing invisible battles. "The enemy," he wrote, "assails me with blasphemies. He makes the room tremble. He whispers doubts against faith." He claimed to feel both the divine presence and infernal rage within hours of each other. For a young friar raised on tales of saints and martyrs, it was both terrifying and strangely confirming. Okay, everyone, I just want to take a brief break in the story here to discuss some things that come to mind just with the beginning of Padre Pio's story here, and you'll see it'll carry on throughout the theme of the rest of his story. As a modern Catholic, or someone that was born post-Vatican II, I only know the modern way of thinking, I guess. I don't really know how to describe that, but it's always puzzled me how within the church, some people seem to have the ability to see straight through into the supernatural world, and they will tell you that it exists alongside our own. And others dismiss everything mystical as outdated or superstitious, and some will say it's, just symbolic. I think personally, I've always leaned towards the first group, with my justification of that being the story of Christ himself. I mean, it's saturated in the supernatural. We see miracles, visions, healings. It's how he revealed his divinity to anyone willing to pay attention. Some people have faith so strong that they don't need supernatural signs at all. And others find these moments open their eyes to the reality that we're caught in a very real struggle for our souls. Almost like a tug of war between good and evil. And honestly, as long as your faith brings you closer to God, I'm fine with either approach. But in Padre Pio's case, just digging into his story, I don't think he had the luxury of choosing. I don't believe anyone that holy would or could lie about his encounters with the divine, or in the same sense with the enemy. I think some people are called into spiritual battles that test their faith with doubts or temptations, some people with fear. Others, and I think this is a rare few because we don't know too many, not many of us know a Padre Pio, are drawn into the battle physically too. And that doesn't scare me because I trust completely in God's protection, but it does remind me that the closer you draw to holiness, the more you attract the attention of the enemy. And Pio clearly had a target on his back. The stigmata, terrifying to witness, became his armor. It was proof of both his suffering and his protection. Spiritual warfare is real, whether we acknowledge it or not, and Padre Pio's life stands as a powerful testimony to that truth. His story reminds us that no matter what we endure, faith in Jesus ultimately brings peace. Okay, let's get back to the story of Padre Pio. In 1910, at the age of 23, he was ordained a priest. He returned briefly to Pietrelcina to recover from illness. There, isolated in his childhood village, he began to experience the phenomena that would define his life, an invisible warfare that saints and skeptics alike would one day wrestle to explain. Padre Pio's letters from 1911 outwardly describe nightly attacks. Not dreams, not hallucinations, but physical encounters. He told his spiritual director that he was assaulted by demons, that they hurled him from bed, beat him, and filled the air with the stench of sulfur. Other friars later testified that they had heard noises, thuds, and even guttural voices emanating from his room. It would be easy to dismiss that as hysteria or night terrors, if not for the consistency, the detail, and the lasting physical effects. In one letter he wrote, "They appeared as horrible beasts. The blows are so real I fear for my life. Yet, when I call on the name of Jesus, they vanish." It's difficult to know how to read this through modern eyes, but for Pio and for those who knew him, it was not a metaphor. It was war, a spiritual war fought on the cloister of his cell. And through it all, he continued his priestly duties, hearing confessions, saying Mass, offering counsel. This balance between agony and duty would define him for the next 50 years. In 1918, the world was broken. The Great War had ended and millions were dead. Padre Pio was 31 years old, recovering from the Spanish flu that had nearly killed him. He had just finished celebrating Mass early that morning and returned to the choir loft of the small friary church, his favorite place to pray in silence. He knelt before the crucifix and began what he called his usual thanksgiving. Nothing unusual, no visions, no ecstasy, just prayer. But then the air changed. Pio later described it as a mysterious heavenly being appearing before him. Not Christ in agony, not an angel with wings, but a presence radiating purity and sorrow simultaneously. He said its wounds were like flames, burning without consuming. Suddenly a brilliant light burst around him. Pio said, "I saw the mysterious person approach. From his wounds came rays of light, which struck my hands, feet, and side. They were like blades of fire piercing me." He collapsed, unable to speak. The pain was immediate, crushing, overwhelming. The wounds matched the crucifixion marks of Christ, hands, feet, and the right side. He tried to stand, but he couldn't. He tried to hide his hands inside his sleeves, but they burned unbearably. He whispered, "Dio mio, por favor, take it away. My God, please." The wounds did not close. They did not heal. They remained red, open, and bleeding, yet never became infected, and bore a strange fragrance many associated with him, roses and tobacco. He begged for two things. One, remove the marks. Two, leave the pain, if it would save souls. God granted neither request. The stigmata stayed for 50 years, bleeding daily, often heavily, enough that he wore special wool mittens to prevent leaving blood everywhere he touched. When the doctors examined him days later, they found clean, symmetrical wounds, no evidence of infection, no self-inflicted mechanism, and no natural explanation. Photographs soon spread across Italy. Rome became concerned, pilgrims flooded in, and Padre Pio's life changed forever. He later said the moment it happened felt like a wound of love, which will never heal in his life. He would bear these for 50 years. I once heard a priest say that on his very first day of seminary, the instructor looked each student in the eye and said, "If you have even the slightest doubt about becoming a priest, stand up and leave now." Before I became a true Christian, priests were just part of the backdrop. The formal pageantry, the incense, the vestments, the rhythm and ceremony of the Catholic liturgy. I didn't yet understand the depth behind any of it. It wasn't until years later that the Mass finally opened itself to me. The meaning of the prayers, the symbolism, the sheer gravity of encountering Christ in the Eucharist. By the time I reached my 40s, I realized just how essential the priest is to the life of the Church, and how enormous the weight of that calling truly is. When you really think about what a priest does, it's staggering. I mean, think about his schedule. I was just talking to my wife about this the other day when we were trying to figure out just how busy the Monsignor of our local cathedral is. He's baptizing newborns, celebrating weddings, comforting the dying, burying the dead, sitting at family tables, visiting the sick, praying the office, presiding over Mass every single day, hearing confessions for hours on end, and that's only the part that we see. Padre Pio was no different. He entered the priesthood knowing the seriousness of the vocation. What he didn't know was how radically God would test him. He had no way of anticipating the suffering that would follow. But what we do know is that he was willing, fully willing to suffer for Christ. When I take on a major project at home or work, I'm 5 minutes in and already counting down the time till it's done. Now imagine joining the priesthood, and on top of that being met with relentless torment from demons, and then facing it head on for 50 years. No quitting, no running, no tapping out. A man that can endure that and remain faithful, humble, and obedient is holy in ways that we can barely begin to comprehend. The Vatican ordered medical investigations. Some believed it was psychosomatic phenomena, others a supernatural mark. Padre Pio himself never claimed to understand it. He only said, "I suffer for souls." From that moment forward, he became both a magnet and a mystery. Pilgrims flocked to him, skeptics denounced him. The church, alarmed by his sudden fame, placed him under scrutiny. And Padre Pio, frail, wounded, and obedient, withdrew into silence. The stage was set for a half-century of controversy, devotion, and supernatural mystery that would make him one of the most venerated and investigated figures in modern church history. By the late 1910s, the name Padre Pio had begun to circulate far beyond the dusty lanes of San Giovanni Rotondo. What began as whispers among locals, the friar who bleeds with Christ, soon spread across all of Italy. Letters poured from soldiers, mothers, widows, skeptics, and the sick. They came asking for prayers, miracles, even a lock of his blood-stained bandages. But fame, as it often does with saints, carried a dark edge. Church officials grew very uneasy. The Vatican had seen enthusiasm for living saints before and knew how dangerous unchecked devotion could become. The Church's caution wasn't cynicism, it was discipline. Rome demanded evidence, proof, and order, not hysteria or cultish behavior. Investigations began, quietly at first, then with the slow, grinding weight of church bureaucracy. Padre Pio, for his part, tried to remain obedient. He stayed in his cell, prayed the rosary, heard confessions for up to 18 hours a day. His health, already frail, began to deteriorate even further. Witnesses claimed the blood from his wounds smelled of flowers, a phenomenon known as the odor of sanctity. The odor of sanctity refers to a supernatural fragrance often reported in connection with holy individuals, especially after their deaths. It's considered a sign of their sanctity and the presence of God's grace. Throughout history, there have been a number of reports of this phenomena occurring with saints and other holy figures. The fragrance is typically described as sweet or floral, distinct from ordinary earthly scents. The odor of sanctity symbolizes the purity, holiness, and virtue of the individual. It serves as a sensory reminder of their closeness to God and the divine presence in their lives. This phenomena is considered miraculous because the scent often emanates without any identifiable source, such as perfume or flowers, and may be reported by multiple individuals simultaneously, further attesting to its supernatural origin. While not an official criterion for canonization, the presence of the odor of sanctity is often noted in hagiographies and the documentation of saints' lives. It can be one of the many signs appreciated by the faithful that testify to the saint's holiness. For the faithful, the odor symbolizes the transformative power of a life lived in communion with God. It suggests the invisible yet powerful workings of grace in the lives of those dedicated to following Christ. In 1922, the Holy Office, what we now call the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, began a formal investigation into Padre Pio. The Vatican has a meticulous process for investigating suspected miracles, especially when they are associated with canonization causes or claims of sanctity involving living or deceased individuals. The process involves several critical steps. The first step usually occurs at the local level where the supposed miracle has taken place. Typically, a bishop or ecclesiastical authority in the area is informed and may begin gathering preliminary evidence and testimonies. If the miracle involves something physical happening to the body, such as a healing, a thorough medical examination is necessary. Independent medical experts, including non-Catholics, are often consulted to determine if the healing is scientifically inexplicable. This involves reviewing medical records, obtaining objective data, and ensuring the healing is complete, instantaneous, and enduring. All findings and testimonies are compiled into a comprehensive dossier. This includes detailed documentation of the event itself, the individuals involved, and expert assessments regarding the nature of the miracle. The dossier is then forwarded to the Vatican's Congregation for the Causes of Saints, where theological consultants assess whether the event is consistent with Catholic teaching and belief in divine intervention. A panel of theologians and medical experts appointed by the congregation conducts a more in-depth review, evaluating both the scientific and theological aspects of the case. If the event is deemed miraculous, it proceeds to a commission of cardinals and bishops affiliated with the congregation, who then vote on whether to recommend papal approval. Ultimately, the final decision rests with the Pope, who may recognize the event as a miracle. The recognition is often part of a canonization process, but can occur independently when addressing claims about living clergy. This process would have been no different for Padre Pio. Inspectors were sent, his letters were intercepted, his confessors and doctors were questioned. A report was eventually returned to Rome that was damning. It alleged that Padre Pio's stigmata were of human origin. One doctor claimed he had used carbolic acid to maintain the wounds. A local pharmacist swore that Pio had requested the substance, though he later admitted under pressure that he didn't know what for. The Vatican took no chances. By 1923, Padre Pio was silenced. He was forbidden to say Mass publicly, hear confessions, or communicate with the spiritual children outside the monastery. For a man whose life was defined by obedience, it was the ultimate crucifixion. Though he accepted it quietly, "The will of God is everything," he wrote. The faithful, however, were furious. They saw him as a victim, a holy man persecuted by the church he served. Crowds still gathered outside the monastery gates, praying day and night. The friars felt overwhelmed. By 1933, a new pope, Pius XI, reviewed the case. After years of internal debate and political wrangling, the restrictions were lifted. Pio returned to public ministry, but the years of isolation had changed him. His tone was quieter now. His eyes were darker, his words laced with both humility and pain. Padre Pio often spoke of another war, one of not men but spirits. He described nightly battles with what he called "le mondo," the unclean one. Witnesses in the monastery swore they heard inhuman noises coming from his cell. Furniture thrown, walls shaken, groans, screams, thuds. Pio said the devil would appear to him in many forms, sometimes as a shadow, sometimes as a black dog, even as a mocking parody of Jesus himself. "Don't be surprised if you find yourself in darkness," he told one spiritual daughter. "The devil is a chained beast, but when he roars, the whole world trembles." To the modern ear, it sounds medieval, even superstitious, but for Pio, these were not metaphors. These were as real as the blood on his hands. There's a fascinating tension here. A 20th century man living in the age of radios, cars, and modern medicine, describing demonic combat as if it's from the pages of early Christian martyrdom. The Vatican again was uneasy. How could the Church, which had spent centuries taming the mystical edge, reconcile these accounts with the rational world? Yet there were witnesses. Doctors, soldiers, and even atheists came to him and left believing they'd experienced something supernatural. By the 1940s and 50s, Padre Pio had become the most famous priest in Italy. Pilgrims arrived by the tens of thousands. Airplanes flew overhead carrying the sick, the dying, the desperate, all seeking a glimpse of him, a word, or a blessing. He performed healings, or at least healings were attributed to him, in staggering numbers. The blind saw, the cripple walked, tumors vanished. Doctors documented the cases but couldn't find explanations. Then came something even stranger. Allied airmen flying missions over Italy during World War II reported that a friar in the sky appeared before their planes, warning them away from bombing San Giovino Rotondo. The pilots, Catholic and Protestant alike, swore to the story. When they described him to locals, they were shown a photo. Every one of them said the same. "That's him." The story reached the Vatican. Officially, it was dismissed. Unofficially, who could say? Padre Pio himself refused to discuss it. This phenomena is known as bilocation. Bilocation is the miraculous ability attributed to certain individuals, typically saints, to be present in two different locations at the same time. The phenomena is supernatural as it defies laws of space and time. Numerous accounts exist of Padre Pio appearing in locations far from his physical presence at the monastery in San Giovanni Rotondo. Witnesses testified to encountering him in diverse places. Accounts often describe Padre Pio's bilocated presence occurring to provide spiritual support, bring comfort, or perform acts of charity. These accounts are seen as manifestations of God's grace working through Padre Pio to reach individuals in need. In Catholic understanding, such phenomena are attributed to God's power and are seen as signs of the individual's holiness and closeness to God. They bear witness to the hidden ways God acts within creation, demonstrating his providence. The Church emphasizes the importance of faith and the transformative power of divine grace, which such experiences might reveal. Bilocation in Padre Pio's life serves as a reminder of the mysteries inherent in the lives of the saints and the ways God's grace can operate beyond human limitations. Despite the fame, the constant stream of pilgrims, the miracles, Padre Pio's life was marked by physical agony. The wounds burned, bled, and ached continuously. His health was fragile. He suffered from chronic bronchitis, arthritis, stomach pains, and what doctors called nervous exhaustion, though he never sought relief. To him, suffering wasn't punishment, it was participation. The cross, he said, is my book. Yet even in his pain, he continued hearing confessions, sometimes for 16 hours straight. Penitents would line the monastery courtyard at dawn, waiting for their turn to unburden their lives. Some described the experience as terrifying. He could see through lies, they said, cutting straight to sins they hadn't confessed out loud. The Vatican investigations would resume several more times. In the 1950s and the 1960s, they were spurred by new reports of fanaticism among his followers, or by rival clergy jealous of his popularity. But no accusation ever stuck. His obedience never wavered. And so Padre Pio's middle years became a paradox. A man of unbearable suffering, stripped of privacy, often misunderstood, yet radiating holiness in a way that defied reason. He once wrote, "I am a mystery to myself." By the early 1960s, Padre Pio was an old man. The once wiry friar was now frail, his beard silver, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. Decades of hearing confessions and battling illness had taken their toll. And yet, his fame had only grown. San Giovanni Rotondo, a village once barely a smudge on a map, had become one of the most visited pilgrimage sites in the Catholic world. Every day, hundreds of people gathered outside the friary. Some were there for healing, others simply to look upon the man they believed carried the wounds of Christ. But beneath the reverence was a man still bound by pain. His hands, feet, and side continued to bleed, though by now he tried to conceal them with fingerless gloves. He once wrote, "The pain is so great that I feel as though I am dying from moment to moment." And yet those who saw him said he radiated peace. His masses, long, solemn, transcendent, left hardened skeptics in tears. He would pause at the elevation of the host, his face contorted in agony, sometimes motionless for minutes. Those who witnessed it said it was as if he was seeing something, or someone, that no one else could see. Padre Pio's compassion extended beyond prayer. He had long dreamed of building a hospital, not a grand cathedral, but a house of mercy, a place where the sick could not just find medicine, but dignity. In 1956, after years of donations, fundraising, and local labor, his vision became a reality. The Casa Sollievo della Sofferenza, the home for the relief of suffering. It stood like a fortress of compassion on the hill overlooking San Giovanni Rotondo. Doctors called it one of the most advanced hospitals in Italy at the time. Padre Pio called it a temple of science and faith. Here, for perhaps the only time, we see the mystical friar seen as a man of practical vision. He didn't just bear the wounds of Christ, he built something lasting in his name. And yet the church continued to watch him carefully. His followers had become a movement, sometimes too zealous, too emotional, too defiant of Vatican authority. Rome feared a cult of Pio. He, however, wanted none of it. He told his spiritual children again and again, "Do not look at me, look to Christ." The 1960s brought both physical and spiritual trial. Padre Pio was sick more often now. He suffered from recurring bronchitis, arthritis, and several intestinal pains. His hands were swollen and disfigured from decades of bleeding. And yet, he refused to rest. He continued hearing confessions, sometimes 6 to 8 hours a day. The friars begged him to slow down. He refused. But it wasn't only illness that tormented him. He confided to close friends that the demonic attacks, the noises, the blows, the temptations, had never fully ceased. Even as an old man, he said, "The devil is not yet tired of me." He wrote that Satan tried to tempt him with despair, whispering that his life had been a fraud, that his stigmata were a lie, and that God had abandoned him. He fought back with prayer, the rosary, and silence. Those close to him said that in his final years, he seemed to live in two worlds, one visible, one unseen. September 22, 1968, Padre Pio was 81 years old. He was too weak to stand unaided. His body trembled as he celebrated Mass that morning, the anniversary of the stigmata he had received 50 years before. Witnesses say he seemed to know his time was near. At the conclusion of service, he whispered, "Thank you." That night, he asked to make his final confession. Then he requested to say the words, "Jesu Maria." Just before dawn on September 23rd, he drew his last breath. The friars noticed something extraordinary. The stigmata, the open bleeding wounds he had borne for a half century, had vanished. No scars, no trace of blood. His hands were smooth, unmarked, as if untouched. The mystery that began with pain had ended in peace. Before I ever researched into it, I always wondered why the church was so hesitant on embracing the supernatural. After all, we witness the changing of the bread and wine to the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ at every Mass. The Vatican even recognizes between 100 to around 150 documented Eucharistic miracles, involving events where the host or wine transform into living flesh and blood, often scientifically analyzed to show matching heart tissue, all of them having the common blood type A and B. But like everything else, accepting and embracing the supernatural isn't as easy as it seems. Some Catholics outright reject it or are wary of mysticism due to concerns it prioritizes personal experiences over scripture and church teaching. It risks delusion or heresy and can downplay communal sacraments for individual feelings. It seems too abstract or unproven compared to traditional or intellectual faith. The list of reasons for skepticism is pretty straightforward. Mysticism's focus on direct experiences can seem to displace the Bible and church tradition as ultimate guides, leading to unverified claims. There's concern about mistaking psychological states for divine encounters, especially given biblical warnings about the heart's deceitfulness. Historically, mystics whose visions challenged the local church could face accusations, excommunications, or worse, create distrust. Some modern Catholics emphasize proving faith intellectually, viewing mysticism's emphasis on inner feelings and the beautiful as less rigorous than truth-seeking. Traditional Catholicism values communal sacraments, while mysticism's inward focus can seem isolating or lead to bypassing the church's structure. The church's official stance on the supernatural can be defined with one word: nuance. The Catholic Church considers mysticism a legitimate spiritual gift, but private revelations are not binding dogma and must align with scripture and tradition, requiring discernment. Popes emphasize that true mysticism leads to greater conformity with God's will, not just interior delights, and must be tested humbly through church teaching. In essence, resistance often stems from a desire to safeguard doctrinal purity, communal unity, and clear scriptural authority against potential excesses or misinterpretations within personal spiritual journeys. Let's get back to Padre Pio's story. His death triggered another wave of investigations. Doctors examined his body. The wounds were truly gone. The Vatican reopened files, questioning witnesses, reviewing old testimony, and cross-referencing medical records. Over the next several decades, the Church applied its most rigorous standards of canonization, interviewing over 100 witnesses, collecting thousands of pages of documentation. Miracles continued to be reported: the healing of a young boy with meningitis, a woman cured of terminal illness after praying to Padre Pio. In each case, doctors confirmed that there was no natural explanation. And so, on May 2nd, 1999, Pope John Paul II, who had once visited Padre Pio as a young priest, declared him blessed. 3 years later, in 2002, he was canonized before a crowd of 500,000 in St. Peter's Square. The church had moved cautiously, as it always does, but finally, officially, acknowledged what millions of ordinary believers already knew. Padre Pio was a saint. Today, his image hangs in homes, hospitals, and churches across the world. To some, he's a relic of a bygone era, a mystical age. To others, he's proof that the supernatural didn't vanish with the medieval world, that grace still breaks through modern noise. His stigmata, his visions, his encounters with the demonic, they challenged our assumptions about reality. They confront us with a question modern minds rarely ask. What if it's all true? He lived through world wars, the rise of fascism, the dawn of the atomic age. He heard confessions from soldiers, politicians, peasants, and skeptics. And through it all, he offered the same prescription: prayer, confession, suffering united with Christ. In a century defined by disbelief, Padre Pio dared to believe that pain could be holy, that even the wounds of the world could become channels of redemption. To this day, science can't explain the stigmata. Psychology can't account for the healings. Historians can't fully trace how an obscure friar from a mountain village became one of the most venerated figures in modern Catholicism. And maybe that's the point. Holiness isn't a puzzle to be solved. It's a fire to be witnessed. Padre Pio once said, "After my death, I will do more. My real mission will begin then." In the decades since, his words have proven true. His intercession continues to be reported. His relics draw millions, and his legacy of prayer, humility, and suffering endures like a beacon through the fog of the modern world. He was, in every sense, a man out of time, a mystic trapped in an age that preferred machines to miracles, and yet he may be exactly what the age needed. In the end, every investigation into Padre Pio seems to return to the same conclusion. No one really knows. Doctors couldn't explain him, theologians couldn't contain him, and even the Catholic Church that canonized him remains cautious, reverent but careful, because to confront a life like his is to confront the limits of our own understanding. Maybe this is why his story endures. It forces us to ask questions we'd rather not face. What if miracles still happen? What if suffering has meaning? What if sanctity isn't a metaphor, but a fire burning quietly in the world, waiting to be noticed? Padre Pio's life is not comfortable reading. It isn't meant to be. It's a reminder that faith is not safe, that the divine, if real, is something far stranger and more dangerous than most of us want to believe. And yet, in the silence of his cell, in the endless line of sinners who came to him, in the faint scent of roses that followed his bleeding hands, there is a message. That holiness, true holiness, does not separate itself from human pain. It enters it. It bleeds. Padre Pio once said, "The soul that loves God always smiles." Perhaps that's the final mystery, that beneath the agony and the doubt, he was ultimately a man at peace. There was a profound duality in researching and attempting to understand the stigmata, the visions, and the demonic attacks endured by Padre Pio. On one level, they must have been utterly terrifying to witness and to experience, not merely in the obvious physical sense, but deep in their spiritual weight. To be confronted so directly with the supernatural is to be confronted with eternity itself. Imagine what it must have felt like for Padre Pio to realize that he had been chosen by God to suffer. History is filled with holy men and women who bore extraordinary pain for the sake of Christ. To know that you have been asked to join their ranks, to carry the cross of that magnitude, must inspire fear even in the strongest soul. Suffering, when accepted knowingly and deliberately, strips away every illusion of comfort. Yet there's another side to this coin. There's reassurance, perhaps even an overwhelming validation of faith. We all struggle with doubt, and we all wrestle with silence. But when God reveals himself so unmistakably, when he allows his presence to be felt in such terrifying and intimate ways, the question of whether he exists is no longer a struggle. The struggle becomes how faithfully will you respond. Yes, you will suffer for Christ, but you will suffer knowing whom you serve and knowing the purpose that awaits you. Padre Pio was, in many ways, a draftee into the army of God. He didn't seek the battlefield, yet he was sent to it all the same. He fought evil in the trenches, hearing confessions, confronting sin, enduring attacks seen and unseen, and he brought countless souls to redemption, a mission that did not end with his death. In our next episode, we will learn that God's recruitment in his pursuit of souls is far broader than we might expect. It's understandable when he calls giants of faith like Padre Pio, behemoths forged for spiritual warfare. But what happens when he asks for the suffering from the smallest among us? We will discover that saints come in all ages, and that even children can teach us something profound about carrying the weight of being chosen, and what it means to stand, however briefly, as representatives of God's infinite grace. Thank you for listening to the first episode of the Hallowed Dead, Padre Pio, a story of a man that lived in two worlds and reminded us that the line between heaven and earth is thinner than we think. This has been the Hallowed Dead on Divine Mercy Radio. If you missed any part of today's episode or want to hear past programs, visit divinemercyradio.org. Click Listen, then Local Programs. May the witness of the saints draw you closer to God. Until next time.